Der Klett-Cotta-Blog ist immer noch auf dem Stand der Buchmesse bei Klett-Cotta. Neben mir sitzt Keith Lowe. Keith Lowe, nice to meet you here on this stand of Klett-Cotta. You studied English literature at the University of Manchester, and as history you worked as editor by Kassel. And in 2010 you left your job to become writer, and you have written a book about Hamburg.
Yes. Yeah. While this happened while I was an editor for years, I simultaneously was writing my own things, and I wrote a book about the bombing of Hamburg in 1943. Terrible disaster, and much ignored by British people and American people. In fact, most people. Because it's overshadowed by Dresden, you know. So, but actually, Hamburg was much worse in terms of scale and human loss. So, yeah.
For your book, Savage Kontinent, Europe in the Aftermath of World War II, was published in 2012,
yes.
And you received the Hassel-Tillman Prize for History. You have written several books with fiction, and 2 books about World War II and its aftermath, Inferno, at firebombing in Hamburg, you just told it. And Savage Kontinent examines the years after the end of World War II in Europe. There's also a book of Tony Judd, Histories, which is very large, more than 1,000 pages. And I think you have chosen a different approach.
Yeah, I mean, Tony Judd's approach was to take the whole of Europe, but from 1945 all the way through to 2000. I chose to look at the whole continent as well, but just to concentrate on this transition period between 1943-44, when the war began to end, through till around 1950, when stability started to really be seen around the continent.
And I think you have filled a real gap.
Well, there certainly, when I wrote it, there was nothing else that I could find that was it told the same story, which took the whole of Europe and showed that the same themes were happening in each country.
You start with an analysis of the physical and moral destruction. In fact, the war was not over at all. You could precise.
Yeah. I mean, we have a strange idea of the Second World War. I think we believe it to be a simple conflict between the Allies on one side and the Axis on the other. But actually, simultaneously, there were lots of other things happening. There were local civil wars, there were political conflicts, there was ethnic conflicts, all happening at the same time. And just because the war with Germany had finished, it didn't mean these other conflicts had to stop. And of course they didn't stop. They carried on for years after 1945.
And why the period of 1944 and 49 is so fascinating for you?
Well, because this is the time that the Europe that we live in today, this is when it was formed. This was the sort of protean chaos out of which our
chaos, yes.
Yes, absolute chaos.
No government, no civil rules.
Absolutely, all the institutions that existed before the war had been either destroyed completely or discredited, and so we had to rebuild from this leveled landscape.
I think you have right to choose these 2 dates, because one is the end of the war, and 49 the world is already in the whole Cold War, and which sort of influence has this long period of 4 years about the beginning of the Cold War?
I mean, this is we do tend to think of this time of history as being, okay, you have the war, and then after the war you have the Cold War. But what I want to show is that this period of transition in between, and this is the interesting part, where things are changing all over Europe in a very comprehensive way.
Yes. But the chaos did not last only a few months. The chaos.
Oh no. Well, don't get me wrong. In some places, the chaos lasted only a few months. but in other places it lasted for years, into the 1950s. I mean, if you look at the Baltic states or Ukraine, the chaos lasted for years and years after the war. In Greece, the period between 1944 and 1949, far more people died in the aftermath of the war than died during the war.
Yes. Every European country made different experiences after the war.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the themes are the same, but the way that people deal with them are different depending on which country you're looking at. So you know, things in Norway, for example, were relatively civilized, whereas in Poland it was complete chaos. There were no institutions. There was incredible violence on a day-to-day level. I mean, I interviewed people who told me stories of it being impossible to walk down the street. They had to carry weapons in order to defend themselves from the militia, from the police, from their fellow citizens. Chaos.
And the anti-Semitism did not end with the liberation of the camps, of the concentration camps.
Unfortunately, no. In fact, in some places it actually increased, because people were resentful of the Jews who they felt somehow were getting some special treatment because of their victimhood status. Allowances weren't made for the terrible things they went through, because people didn't want to think about these things. They didn't want to think that there was somebody who had suffered more than they had, because of course everybody had suffered.
We have a good idea how many people were killed during the war, but do we know the number who perished in the lawlessness after the World War?
The short answer is no, not really. I mean, you can extrapolate statistics from by using demographic means, but you know, people didn't make a record of how many people died or how many people were killed in all these situations around Europe. They just didn't have the capacity to do so. They didn't have the administrative apparatus anymore. It had all been destroyed. So yeah, the figures are, whatever figures you give, are at best guesswork.
The problems, all the destructions, they did facilitate to the Soviet Union to occupy Eastern Europe.
Yes, yeah. I mean, Poland again is a perfect example where, because the country had been so destroyed, and because all the old systems of governance had been removed. I mean, it was like a blank slate for the Soviets. They could come in and impose whatever system they wanted to. In other countries which were less destroyed, like Romania or Bulgaria, it was a much more difficult job, because they had to remove the previous apparatus before they could then institute their own. So, yeah, the places where the war was most destructive was the easiest places for the Soviets to impose their system.
And also Germany took 4 years before the constitution was made in '49, isn't it so?
Well, yes. Yeah, I mean, and during that period, you were an occupied country with a military government. I mean, which was a humiliation. I mean, this must have been very difficult for people to live with. After all the dreams of glory that had been sold.
Not a real glory.
No, but it was a sudden wake up for the nation, and it must have been very difficult to experience this.
This was unconditional surrender in 1949.
Oh, and humiliation, which is not often acknowledged, because of course, you know, they were the baddies, so it doesn't matter if they were humiliated. But
which are the three main theses of your book?
The three main theses. Well, the first is that we should not try to only look at our history from a purely nationalist point of view. You know, everybody has their own point of view, but we have to see the other points of view to see what a more rounded picture of what the story is. Secondly, the Second World War did not just come to a straight end. It continued. And thirdly, the rosy picture that we have of everything somehow going back to normal was not true. There was violence everywhere, and it lasted for a long time. So those would be my three theses, if I have to choose.
You have written this book especially for historians or for other people also?
No, not especially for historians. I mean, I would like to think historians will read it and find interest in it, but I think it's equally important to have a general public. I mean, it's written in a way which I hope will appeal to ordinary people. You don't necessarily need to have a deep knowledge of history in order to read it and understand it.
Thank you very much. Von Keith Lowe, das Buch Der wilde Kontinent, Europa in den Jahren der Anarchie von 1943 und 1950, war bei Klett-Cotta erscheinen. Thank you very much.
Thank you.